A Toyota master technician with 22 years of experience said something that stopped me cold. He said the number one cause of preventable engine failure he sees walk through his shop is not oil neglect. It is not bad spark plugs. It is AIR pockets trapped inside the cooling system after an improper coolant flush. And he said 90% of SUV owners who change their own coolant or even take it to a quick lube shop have no idea this problem is silently building inside their engine right now. Today I am breaking down the exact 15-minute Japanese coolant bleeding technique that Toyota, Honda, and Subaru dealership technicians use, and why skipping this step is why your SUV is overheating on the highway. First, let's talk about what is actually happening inside your engine. Your cooling system has one job: move heat away from your engine and dump it out through the radiator. To do that, coolant has to flow through every passage, every hose, every corner of that system without interruption. The second air gets trapped in one of those passages. You have a dead zone, a spot where no cooling is happening. Your temperature gauge might look fine for weeks. Then one afternoon on the freeway in July, the needle starts creeping toward red. You pull over. The engine is cooked, and the mechanic tells you it will be $4,200 to replace a warped head gasket. Here is the part that makes this infuriating. The air pocket did not appear on its own. You put it there. Or rather, whoever flushed your coolant put it there because they did not bleed the system afterward. So what is this Japanese technique, and why does it work? In Japan, dealerships use the term ianuki, which literally translates to air removal. It is a mandatory post-flush procedure baked into the service manual of virtually every Japanese-made vehicle. Toyota's official service documentation for the 4Runner, RAV4, and Highlander all include a specific bleeding protocol after any coolant service. Same with Honda's CR-V, Pilot and Passport. Same with Subaru's Forester and Outback. The procedure is right there in the manual, but outside Japan, quick lube shops skip it because it adds time. Dealerships rush it, and DIYers do not know it exists. The result is a cooling system full of invisible air traps just waiting to fail you at the worst possible moment. Step 1. Start with the right coolant. Before you touch a single hose, this part matters more than people realize. Japanese automakers are extremely specific about coolant chemistry. Toyota uses a pink Toyota Super Long Life coolant. It is an OAT formula, which stands for Organic Acid Technology. Honda uses a blue OAT coolant. Subaru specifies a blue coolant that is also OAT-based. These are not interchangeable with the generic green coolant you find at a gas station. Green coolant uses silicate-based inhibitors that break down within 2 years. OAT coolant is rated for 5 years or 150,000 miles in most Japanese vehicles. A study published by the Society of Automotive Engineers found that mixing incompatible coolant types creates silicate gel inside the cooling passages. That gel does not circulate. It sits. It blocks flow. And it accelerates exactly the kind of overheating failure you are trying to prevent. So step 1. Use the coolant your manufacturer specifies, not whatever is on sale. Step 2. The drain and flush. Jack up the front of your SUV if you can. It helps the system drain more completely. Remove the radiator drain plug, which is usually on the bottom corner of the radiator. Let it drain fully. This takes about 5 to 7 minutes. Do not skip distilled water for flushing. Tap water has minerals and dissolved solids that leave deposits on internal cooling passages over time. A 2019 study from the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers found tap water with calcium and magnesium levels above 50 parts per million caused measurable scaling inside cooling systems within 18 months. Distilled water costs about $1.20 at any grocery store. Use it. Close the drain plug, fill the system with distilled water, and run the engine for 5 minutes to circulate it. Drain again. Now you have a clean system ready for fresh coolant. Step 3. Fill with the 70% coolant to 30% distilled water mix, not a 50% mix. Here is where most people get this wrong. The standard advice says mix coolant 50% with water, which gives you freeze protection down to minus 34 degrees Fahrenheit. For most of the continental United States, 70% coolant to 30% distilled water is actually better. Here is why. A 70% to 30% mix raises your boiling point to approximately 276 degrees Fahrenheit versus 265 degrees Fahrenheit with a 50% mix. That extra 11 degrees of thermal headroom matters enormously in stop-and-go traffic or when towing. It is the difference between your temperature gauge sitting at normal and starting to creep. The caveat: do not go above 70% coolant. Pure coolant with no water actually has a higher freezing point than the mixed formula, and it transfers heat less efficiently. The 70-30 ratio is the sweet spot that Japanese technicians use. Pour your coolant in slowly. Leave about half an inch of space at the top of the reservoir. And here is the part everyone skips. Step 4. The air bleeding process. This is the whole thing. With the cap still off the coolant reservoir or radiator fill neck, start the engine. Set the heater to maximum heat and set the fan to maximum speed. This is critical. The heater core is the highest point in most cooling systems. Hot coolant rises and air rises. With the heater on max, you force coolant through the heater core, which pushes trapped air up and out through the fill opening. Let the engine idle and watch the coolant level. Within 2 to 4 minutes, you will see something that looks alarming but is perfectly normal: bubbles rising up through the coolant in the reservoir. Those bubbles are the trapped air leaving the system. This is exactly what you want. If you cap the system before those bubbles stop, the air stays inside. Game over. Here is the Japanese technician move that most people have never heard of. While the engine is running and warming up, find the upper and lower radiator hoses and squeeze them firmly 5 to 6 times each. Not hard enough to damage them, but firmly. This physically dislodges air pockets that have settled in the curves and bends of the hose. Toyota's 4Runner service manual specifically calls this out as part of the official bleeding procedure. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. You will often see another surge of bubbles in the reservoir after you do this. Let the engine run until the thermostat opens. You will know, because the temperature gauge will rise to normal operating range and the upper radiator hose will suddenly get hot to the touch. That is the thermostat opening and full coolant flow beginning. At this point, coolant will start flowing through the radiator and the system pressure builds. Top off the coolant to the correct level and replace the cap. Step 5. The heat cycle test. This step gets skipped almost universally, and it is the one that actually confirms the job is done correctly. Let the engine reach full operating temperature, then shut it off and let it cool completely. This takes about 1 hour. Once it is cold, open the reservoir again and check the coolant level. If the level dropped, there was still air in the system. Air compresses under heat, expands, pushes coolant out, then when it cools, the level drops. Top it off again and repeat the heat cycle one more time. Most cooling system failures that happen within 2 weeks of a coolant flush happen because this confirmation step was skipped. The system looked fine when it was hot. A cold check would have shown a low level, meaning AIR was still in the system. Why does this matter so much for SUV owners specifically? SUV cooling systems are more complex than sedans. The engine sits higher relative to the cooling passages. Many three-row SUVs, like the Ford Explorer, Chevy Traverse, and Toyota Highlander, have longer coolant runs to reach a rear heater core. More distance means more opportunity for AIR to pocket at high points in the system. The Ford Explorer specifically has a notoriously difficult system to bleed, with a high point behind the engine that traps air if you do not follow the procedure exactly. Ford's own technical service bulletins address overheating complaints that trace back to improper bleeding, not component failure. In 2022, a survey by the Car Care Council found that 35% of vehicles on American roads have coolant that is degraded, contaminated, or at the wrong level. Of the overheating calls AAA responded to that year, cooling system failures were the single largest category. And according to AAA's own data, overheating is the #1 cause of roadside breakdowns in summer months. How often should you do this? Toyota recommends replacing coolant at 100,000 miles for the first change, then every 50,000 miles after that in their long-life coolant vehicles. Honda recommends every 5 years or 45,000 miles, whichever comes first. Subaru's interval is every 30 months or 30,000 miles for non-OAT coolant and 5 years for their long-life blue coolant. But here is the thing. If you live somewhere with very hot summers, tow regularly, or your SUV has over 80,000 miles on it, do not wait for the maximum interval. Coolant's pH degrades over time. Fresh coolant sits at a pH of 8.5 to 11. Degraded coolant drops into acidic territory below 7, at which point it is no longer protecting your system. It is actively corroding it. A simple coolant test strip costs about $8 and tells you the pH and freeze point of your coolant in 30 seconds. Check it once a year when you are checking tire pressure. Before we wrap up, do me a favor. Hit that like button if you learned something from this. It genuinely helps get this information in front of more people who need it. The bottom line, the Japanese coolant bleeding technique is not complicated. It does not require expensive tools. It takes 15 minutes after a flush that you were already doing. But the consequences of skipping it are real. Warped cylinder heads can cost from $3,000 to $6,000 to repair. A blown head gasket on a V6 SUV can run from $4,000 to $8,000 in labor and parts. A cracked engine block from severe overheating is often a total loss. All of that can come from air trapped in a cooling system because the heater was not turned on and a couple of hoses were not squeezed. Toyota technicians learn this on day 1 of training. Honda's service manual has it in writing. And now you know it too. Check your coolant level this week. Test the pH if your vehicle has more than 40,000 miles on it. And next time someone flushes your cooling system, whether it is you or a shop, make sure the air bleeding process is part of the job. Because 90% of SUV owners driving around right now skipped this step. And some of them are going to find out the hard way this summer. That's all for today. If you have not already, hit subscribe and the bell notification so you catch the next one. Thanks for watching.